It was a fine but cloudy day that gave us a dry track for qualifying at Sandown for the third round of the Australian Endurance Championship, 2 half-hour qualifying sessions. The series is being led by Jim Richards, 48 points from Tony Longhurst, 2 points behind him, and Colin Bond in the Alpha on 36. And that means that in the makes, BMW leads from Alfa Romeo and Nissan. In the top 10 today, we ended up with 3 Skylines, 5 Holden Commodores, a lone Ford Mustang, and a lone BMW that won the race last year. They were competing for pole position, $2,500 on it, but the real surprise was that the Volvo turbos were not ready to take part in any of the qualifying today. They didn't arrive at the track till 3 p.m. and they were very frustrated by it. Here's John Smales.
The Volvos, having worked 80 hours non-stop to get their cars right to be here, have just arrived. Robbie Francevic, you've been refused permission to go out in Castrol qualifying.
That's dead correct. They told me all day that I'd be in it, and it was just a matter of getting our cars here and scrutineered, which they have been. They tell me now that we're not in it.
Why not?
Well, Peter McLeod would be knocked out, you tell me.
How are you feeling?
Well, you know, like it's obvious. I don't know whether it's that I'm a Kiwi or what the reason is, but it's just ridiculous.
Robbie, you hold the lap record here?
I hold a lap record in the car that I'd be driving.
Then what's the problem? What have you been told by the organisers?
That they didn't use their discretionary powers to let me in.
What are you going to do about it?
Well, unfortunately, I'm just a member of a team. I can do nothing, but if I was anything to do with management of the team, I would certainly have a lot to say.
Well, have you spoken to your management about it?
I haven't seen John yet. The man's just worked 80 hours straight, and he's very tired, and I'm certainly not going to burden him with another problem.
So what's the score for tomorrow? Does this mean that the Volvo team starts from the back of the grid?
Both cars, and if I have anything to do with it, I won't start.
Why not, Rob?
Well, I'm just fed up with the whole outfit.
You mean Sandown Park organisers?
Sandown Park organisers.
They're strong words, and they're the words that we maybe wouldn't expect to hear from Robbie Francevic, who we've always seen as being a real fighter who wants to get out there.
Well, you know, like you fight for so long and you finally have to give up.
Well, don't do it tomorrow, Robbie, because we need you there.
You think so? You got plenty of other quick cars.
How well has the Volvo been going?
It hasn't been going well for me, and I'm frustrated and disappointed, and you know, we've missed the first two rounds of the endurance, and here we are as another round, and I'm virtually out of that before I start, so it's very disappointing.
The slowest 2 cars of the 10, Murray Carter and Peter McLeod, were asked if they'd like to step down and give the Volvos a run in this fastest 10, but they declined the offer. President Peter Noonan from the Light Car Club said the discretionary allowance was for those cars who had practiced, but it really bombed out.
This is the biggest and the most varied entry in the 3 rounds so far this year of the Australian Endurance Championship, the long distance race series. For the opening round at Amaroo Park, Dick Johnson, the Mobile Holden dealer team, and the Volvo dealer team all failed to appear. Then the next round at Surfers Paradise again didn't see the appearance of the Volvo turbos. So it's doubly disappointing for them to have missed qualifying for this, the 3rd round, after having missed the first 2, and hopefully to have been ready and absolutely firing at top performance for this round. There really are, however, providing the Volvos can get up with the leading makes in the top 10 qualifying, 5 different makes that are major contenders for this race that was first run here at Sandown in 1964. And of the all the people that have been successful in that race since that time, 2 drivers have really dominated it over those years.
Between them, Peter Brock and Allan Moffat have won 12 Castrol 500s at Sandown. This year, the unthinkable has happened for the fans who flock here to see the clash between the 2 titans. They formed a team. Gentlemen, how's the car going?
Oh, great. Peter will do the qualifying. I've been doing the setting up for the race, and we're very happy with it. We've been experimenting with tires, and provided it doesn't rain, I think we'll be very happy.
Peter, in years past, the fans have gone wild when either you or Allan have driven through. What are they going to do this year?
A certain amount of confusion, I guess, but it's interesting. A lot of young kids, what have you, coming up for autographs, and we've got some nice posters made there with Allan's photograph on it and my photograph on it, and kids just walk away going, wow, things have changed.
Fellas, welcome back to Australia, both of you.
Great to be back.
The Mobile Holden dealer team effort in Europe this year, how well has it been going for you?
Well, it didn't. The results certainly weren't a reflection, I think, on the effort and how competitive we actually were. I mean, if you just consider that probably in an hour and a half's racing, we're probably averaging about a second a lap slower than Walkinshaw, running a car which had some problems with it. And yet, from this side of the ocean, you'd say, well, the guys didn't do the job. Fair enough, we didn't. But I think we still did pretty well. We had problems going wrong, which I'm sure we've solved right now.
We went there cold on Grand Prix circuits, which we had never experienced before. Unbelievable driving style by the Europeans. Curbs mean nothing to them. Through them, over them, around them. And I think the fact that we finished as well as we did is credit to all the team.
Is it next year a case of having to drive the way the Europeans do?
Oh, I don't think there's any question about that. We've learned what the low ball is. We've learned what the handicap is, and it's get out there and do it now, for sure.
For you, Peter, curb jumping, that sort of thing, and indeed for you, Allan, doesn't come easily, I would think, for a man who's based his life on being smooth.
Well, in Australia, with the level of perhaps sponsorship dollar that has been available, and the philosophy of Australian motor racing, Harry Firth, etc., inspiring that sort of thought, there's your piece of machinery, you look after it.
Sure, there's only one piece.
There's
not 10 of them back in the grass. The Walkinshaw team unload 3 rovers and drive 3 of them into the ground, and if one of them blows up, they pull another one out of the truck. It's unbelievable to see in action.
So, Peter, do the sponsorship dollars exist for you to be able to drive like that next year?
Well, the sponsorship dollars have to enable us to drive the car and totally replace bits and pieces after practice and after every race. The life of components, obviously, is a lot less when you are forced to drive a car into the ground like that. The second part of that, of course, is that we found that, well, the next remaining weak link of a motor car. If you drive the car into the ground, something usually was breaking, something quite different from the time before. Now, we reckon we've finally gone through it all now, and in 1987, when we run the new VL Holden, we reckon that car should be absolutely bulletproof. We'll wait and see, but we've designed it to win the World Championship in 87. We think we can put up a pretty good show.
Well, in the meantime, you're back here for the Castrol 500, and then on to the James Hardy 1000. It's a chance for you both, I guess, to really restate your positions in Australian motorsport.
Well, I think that's a little unkind, John. Restate it. We haven't been here to keep it going. We're going into every race to do our very best. We've got 20 years behind us, 40 collectively, and believe me, if there's a better prepared Commodore, fine. Let's see it at the end of the race. And if there's a faster Commodore on Mount Panorama, fine. Let's see it at the end of the race. One thing Europe has taught us is just how hard we really can drive the product. And after 24 hours of Spa, okay, we had a few difficulties, but the car ran on magnificently for 24 hours, and that's what we got behind us. We can take that to Bathurst, translate it. We only have to do 6 hours.
In fact, when I said restate, Allan, I would think that both of you are running really hot at the moment with the experience you've gained in Europe. Peter?
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, just the sheer effort in driving the car fast. Allan and I think we realise exactly what's needed. We feel as if we can do it hour after hour. We know what the limits of the car are and our own personal limits. I think we're probably running harder than ever.
Since they started their turbocharger development program 2 years ago, a Nissan has never finished a long-distance endurance race in Australia. But boy, oh boy, is that going to change this weekend, according to George Fury. George, you found reliability?
Well, we've built engines that are mainly for long-distance races, and we haven't lost any horsepower. We've ran these engines at Service Paradise where we won, and then we ran our 6.5-hour endurance test the day after, and everything's looking very good. So Peter Jackson Nissan Skylines are looking very, very good favourites for here and Bathurst.
Talk about your endurance test. In fact, it was a real punishment of the car.
Well, it is. It was the full Bathurst distance, which at Service Paradise is very comparable to Bathurst, and we actually geared the car down a bit, so we used more revs just to prove that the car can stand it. So, all in all, our co-drivers got a fair drive too, which is very important for the co-drivers to be able to do the times that the main driver does, and they had a fair bit of a drive, so it's looking fairly well.
Speaking of co-drivers, it was a bit surprising to me that perhaps you'd be teamed with Glen Seton, a young man, rather than taking the more experienced Gary Scott as your co-driver.
No, I think I think Glen and I will make a very good team. We understand one another, we like one another, we don't fight, you know, sort of. When you go motor racing, long distance endurance-wise, you really have to look after the car, and I believe Glen can do it, and Glen believes that I can do it, so I think we make a good team that way.
George, you said earlier that you have achieved reliability without a loss of horsepower. Now that defies the laws of science, doesn't it?
No, it's just that our engine man, Barry Seton, has been working very hard, and he has found a couple of things where we can use a little bit less boost and still not hurt the horsepower. And I believe the engines are as reliable as they're going to be, and I hope, like this is motor racing, so you never can be 100% sure, but our cars are very reliable.
What BMWs lose in performance, they more than make up for in reliability. Taking it, for instance, at the Spa 24-hour race earlier this year, the first 5 placings. At Sandown here last year, Jim Richards qualified 4th, but went on to win the race. And in the 2 rounds of the Endurance Championship so far this year, 1st at Amaroo Park, 2nd to the flying Nissan Skyline Turbo of George Fury at Surfers Paradise.
Defending last year's Castrol 500 win, Jim Richards, is it going to be easy this year?
No, it'll be harder than ever. They don't get easier, they always get harder. The competition gets better and better each year, and although our car is going a lot faster than it was last year, of course all the competition is also, so it's going to make it very difficult.
One of your major attributes is that you look like you can get through on one pit stop.
Yes, I think we can. It's panning out that way so far, so we just keep our fingers crossed and go until perhaps we may have to put a little bit in at the end of the race, but I don't think so.
The cars are going much quicker this year, however, Jim. That must really play on fuel economy.
Well, you don't get anything for nothing. I mean, if the car is going to perform better, naturally it's going to use a bit more fuel.
Where do you see your competition come from? The Nissans seem to have reliability this year?
Yes, I think the Nissans, obviously the Commodores will be quick as well, but it's a long race. The Volvos, if they get going, I would say that they won't be easy to beat by any means.
Do you see the turbocharged cars this year really posing a threat in the long distance races?
Yes, I can, because it's all development. They've had a whole season to get their act together, and which they obviously have. Each meeting that they go to and they have a failure, well, obviously they'll make sure that it's not going to happen again.
So what are you left with a naturally aspirated car? How do you beat a turbocharged motor vehicle?
Well, you've got to rely on the reliability and a fast, steady race pace, and hope that the other cars aren't going to be too much ahead of you, because they're going to need 2 stops. So with our 1 stop, if we can keep lapping at a reasonably quick speed, when they have their 2nd stop, we may be able to take over the front positions. I don't know. We'll just have to see what happens as the race goes on.
The fastest 10 of the 39 qualifiers for this Castrol 500 kilometre race at Sandown were to go into a 1-car flying lap time chasing $2,500 and pole position. Before the 4th runner went out, Allan Grice, 2 of the 3 previous runners had already broken the existing lap records. Allan Grice was determined to go out and do better, particularly hot after his European form and competing in the Tourist Trophy race at Silverstone last weekend. Well, just catching it, Allan Grice, locking up everything, getting very sideways, but luckily no damage to the car and another run remaining.
Well, Allan Grice, what happened?
I made a mistake.
How bad?
Oh, first time into the corner at the end of the straight, I just locked up the rear brakes, got sideways, and just lost the lap. Probably lost a second. There's no point carrying on then, so I came in for another set of tyres. Still got another.
So that mistake cost you a set of qualifying tyres?
Yeah, that's right.
How much are you talking there, Allan?
Oh, I'm talking disappointment that I didn't put the lap together, but we've got one more chance, and that's all I need.
First of our qualifiers, Murray Carter driving a Nissan Skyline Turbo. Murray's certainly well known to Australian racing fans for his Ford driving. He was driving a Ford around Sandown here when Peter Brock was in shorts with his tongue hanging over the fence. A lot on the old track and a lot on the new track now. The big question for a dozen bottles of champagne is how old is Murray Carter? Anyway, here's Murray, certainly driving smoothly, a little bit of a twitch. Not the fastest qualifier, but he'll be there at the end with his good friend Bill O'Brien from Everlast. A lot of miles from this driver, a lot of experience. And his time, 1:53.85.
South Coast New South Wales motorcar dealer Peter McLeod was the 1983 Australian Endurance Champion driver, sandwiched between the two wins of Allan Moffat, all of them in Mazda RX-7s. He reappears this year in a Holden Commodore after retiring last year, missing the first year of Group A as he waited for it to sort itself out. The Mazda RX-7, of course, wasn't eligible. 7th fastest in his first run with a 1:53.09 in the Commodore that he'll share with Glen Clark. He is now one of 14 Commodores entered for the Castrol 500 at Sandown. Older than a lot of drivers in the field and with less experience as he slithers out wide because he started his motor racing late. Nevertheless, a very intense and serious driver as he comes to the finishing line. And betters that time by 0.04 of a second, 1:53.05.
The laconic Queenslander Dick Johnson in his Ford Mustang, making the best of what he's got. Well down on power. In fact, Dick's claiming that 30 or 40 metres he is losing to other competitors at the end of the front straight, at the end of the back straight. He's gaining a lot on brakes, a little bit on handling. Look at the slide. Out he comes and kicks up the dirt. He's running equal 5th in the Endurance Championship after the first 2 rounds just by staying there. He's got a Ford Sierra that'll be ready and running next year. But until now, a lap time of 1:51.95.
The defending Australian Touring Car Champion Jim Richards never really looked like hanging on to that championship in the early part of this year, but in the Endurance Championship, things have really started to work very well for him and the JPS BMW team. He, in fact, and BMW have a clear lead in the championship after qualifying 1st and 5th in the 2 rounds so far run and finishing 1st and 2nd. Very wide there, but the car wasn't sliding much, and so it really didn't lose directional control or speed as he comes up now to the finishing line, equal 4th fastest on the first run. Jim Richards in a BMW that was very quick at Bathurst last year, and a 51.49, so betters his time.
Swapping from 2 wheels to 4 wheels, we have Graeme Crosby in a Commodore, a brilliant motorcycle racer, now showing that he's just as good in a racing car, in a sedan car. He's a bit rough on the car. The tyres tend to go off a bit early in the race, but Cros can certainly drive fast. You'll see the left rear window. It's all taped up. It was broken by a wheel brace in the pits. This car was driven by New Zealander Denny Hume earlier, and that car was built by Larry Perkins. Very fast, Cros. This weekend, not quite up with the front runners like he was at Service Paradise. His time on this second run, 1:51.47.
John Harvey was a Speedway champion before he was 20 years of age and a 1.5 litre single-seated champion driver 20 years ago after going road racing. He's Mr. Always Available if I'm wanted for the Holden dealer team, workshop manager, and he shared finally after many Bathurst runs that 3-person Bathurst win with Brock and Perkins in 1983. Known affectionately as Slug, he's gone very well today, 6th fastest in the first run, 52.14, and betters that with 51.26.
This man stepped off the plane on Wednesday from Europe, and he's stepping back on a plane after this race. It's Allan Grice, a last-minute fill-in, co-driver with the car's owner, Graham Bailey. But Grice is a lot faster than Bailey. He's Mr. 10/10ths. And if anybody's going to get right up on top of this grid, it's going to be Grice. He really tries, never stops trying. Full chat all the way. Big fat tyres on this car, rubbing hard on the guards during practice. 1:50.66, that won't put him up the front.
Down to the final 3 runners, and it's Gary Scott trying very hard to improve on a disappointing 1:53.32 in his first qualifying run, sharing the car with Terry Shield. The Nissan honours were upheld at Amaroo Park in the first round by Glen Seton, so George Fury and Gary Scott sitting on the sideline. He qualified third at Surfers, but then broke the drive line right at the start of the race, so first retirement, but also really the cause of a full Bathurst length test the following day, nearly 1,000 kilometres. He really is trying very hard. Fastest time in the first session was Peter Brock, 150.38. And Scott got the Nissan Turbo wound right up, flashing down the straight. And it's a 50.33, which betters Brock's time and is therefore the best so far.
Here's a farmer who drives like a demon. George Fury, #1 driver for the team. Now the gauntlet's really been thrown down here by Scotty, and it's up to Fury to better his time. About 8/10 of a second Fury has to find over his previous time to better Gary Scott. George has improved his driving tremendously since he stepped out of rallying and taken up sedan racing on the blacktop. The Skylines now have better brakes, better front suspension, and look at him working on that steering like Fury.
Virtually his entire motorsport career with Nissan Motor Company, firstly as a privateer in a Datsun 1600, then in factory cars, then in factory race cars. He had a perfect result at Surfers, qualified fastest, then won the race in a car that in one season has advanced enormously. Tremendous credit on the entire team. Fury won more rounds of the Australian Touring Car Championship than the man who won the championship, Robbie Francevic, and would dearly love to take out the Endurance Championship, this race and or Bathurst. Second fastest in the first run. He betters his time, and he in fact has the fastest time so far, 50.22. The bad news is quickly relayed to Peter Brock, who now knows what he has to do, and it's a pretty stiff task.
Now Peter Brock has to knock about 2/10 of a second off his previous time. He's going to have to work very hard, sliding the car through the first turn, nipping up onto the gutter, using as a bit of a buffer through the S-bend, not banging the curbs too hard. Don't want to upset the car. Wrenching it through Castrol, up on the bank again, on the curving. Out of second into third, up the back straight. Brock and Fury are now intense rivals, although it finds that Brock has to fight Scott as much these days. Down to second gear, a hard left turn over the top.
Peter Brock in fact dispatched a third on the grid with those electrifying runs by the Peter Jackson Skyline turbos and really chasing pole position time. He qualified fastest here last year. He's had 9 wins in this Sandown Enduro. It's his home race, the most successful race for one of the most successful Australian drivers in touring car racing. But a man who's had a very lean early part of this year, going to Europe saying I can win races there, and in fact being out-qualified by Allan Grice and not winning races. Really, he covers up and defends his results, but it's been a very disappointing time for him. Now he really is fired up. This must surely be his most important performance. Out with young fans earlier today, signing autographs, in fact, while Alan Moffat was qualifying the car. Very keen, I'm sure, to impress Mobil and to keep them happy with the substantial sums of money needed to run the team. Peter Brock flashing towards the finishing line, trying to beat 50.22, George Fury's time, and he's the first man under 150 in a touring car around Sandown, an electrifying time, and you can see what his co-driver thinks about it. And the rest of the Holden dealer team. General Motors Holden engineer Ray Borrett fairly calm, the rest of the team smugly pleased, and Peter Brock averaging 128.4 kilometres an hour.
Peter, congratulations, well done, you've got pole.
Thanks, John. Yeah, I heard George do a 50.2 there, and George Smith, the guy who looks after the car, can be said, okay, Brocky, want to see a 49.8.
Well, it's the first under 50 second for a Group A car around here.
Yeah, it's nice to sort of break that sort of psychological barrier, I suppose. We've been looking at that time this weekend, and yeah, it's nice to get it below it.
Well, certainly a message to the turbocharged cars tomorrow.
Yeah, and here's hoping from here on in that it's a message to them that the local product can be competitive, and I've always believed it could. he's hoping we can sort of follow through with the nice run to the flag tomorrow.
Peter Brock, congratulations.
Thank you.
Hopefully he can reproduce that sort of performance tomorrow, but reliability hasn't been his strong suit this year. But a stunning time for pole position that gives us in the top 10 out of those final flying qualifying laps. Commodore's qualifying 1st, 4th, 5th, 6th and in 9th position. Skyline's 2nd and 3rd, Fury and Scott, and then in 10th position. BMW, the race winner last year, 7th. And Dick Johnson's Mustang in 8th grid position. With the 2 Volvos down the rear of the grid, which isn't a great handicap really in 129 laps, it could be a 5-make battle to the flag. Fairly certain to be a tough race, hopefully a close one. An unusually fraught but also a very fast and competitive day of qualifying at Sandown today for the 3rd round of the Australian Endurance Championships. John Smales, the times were sensational.
Certainly well, you've got to realise that the top 8 drivers were under last year's Peter Brock qualifying pole position time. 13 of them are under the lap record. Now that's really flying, and you're talking about Brock being 2.5 seconds under his pole position of last year.
A tremendous performance from a man who we expect to do well at Sandown, and yet there's been an awful lot of disparaging comment about him and his team organisation in recent times.
It's certainly been blown out the window today. Brock's back on top and at the circuit where he deserves to be on top, his home circuit Sandown. He's won here 9 times. He's determined to make his mark back in Australian motorsport and make it 10 tomorrow.
Do you think this is a comeback on the basis of his disappointing performances earlier in the season, both here and in Europe?
Oh, from Brock's viewpoint, he doesn't see it that way. He sees himself as always having tried as hard as he could. But Sandown's very special to Brock, and indeed to Moffat. And to have the 2 of them in the 1 car tomorrow is something that the fans here are going to love. But the point I'd like to make is watch the Volvos from the back of the grid tomorrow. Both of them starting. I reckon they'll be up amongst the leaders in the top, or in the first half dozen, maybe 10 laps. And after that, they'll really be going.
Looks a very interesting day for viewers outside Melbourne. The telecast starts at 1:20 p.m, continues through to 5. I hope you'll join us.